She screamed at the janitor to get out of her office. He quietly knelt down to pick up the papers she'd thrown at his feet, and that's when she saw it. The ring on his finger. The same ring that belonged to the woman who died pulling her from a burning car 10 years ago. The woman she never got to thank. The woman whose name she never even knew. And this man, the one she just fired, was her husband. Welcome back to Sterling Stories. If you're new here, this is the place where every story is built around one simple truth, that real human connection shows up in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, at the most unplanned moments. We don't do surface level here. We go deep. Every single time. Now, without wasting your time, let's begin. The storm hit Manhattan like it had a personal grudge against the city. It didn't ease in. It didn't build slowly the way weather forecasters had been warning all week. It just arrived, sudden, massive, and mean, somewhere around 11:30 at night, throwing sheets of rain sideways against every building on the island like it was trying to scrub the whole place clean. The East River was invisible. The bridges were ghost shapes in the dark. And 60 floors above street level, the penthouse office of Vance Tech sat suspended in the middle of all that chaos like a glass box hanging in a storm cloud. Elena Vance hadn't moved in almost 45 minutes. She was still in the same position she'd collapsed into after the call ended, both arms resting on the desk, her forehead nearly touching the polished mahogany surface. The merger documents were everywhere, some stacked, some scattered, 2 or 3 pages that had drifted to the floor hours ago and never been picked up. Her heels were still on. Her earrings were still on. But her eyes were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that had nothing to do with this office, or this building, or the storm pressing against the windows like it wanted in. At 26 years old, Elena Vance was the youngest female tech CEO in the entire state of New York. That wasn't an opinion. That was a documented, verified, widely reported fact that had appeared on the cover of 3 different business magazines in the past 18 months alone. Forbes had called her Ice with a Vision. The Wall Street Journal had run a profile under the headline, "Does She Ever Sleep?" Her board members, mostly men in their 50s who had initially fought her appointment, had stopped fighting about 2 quarters in, when the numbers made argument impossible. She had taken Vance Tech from a 3-person startup operating out of a converted loft in Brooklyn and turned it into a $2 billion company before she was old enough to rent a car without a surcharge. She had done all of that. Every bit of it. And tonight, sitting in this office with rain trying to break through the windows and the merger documents spread out like wreckage, none of it felt like anything at all. The Keller-Reese deal had been 18 months of her life. Not 18 months of 9-to-5 work. 18 months of the real kind. The kind where you cancel Thanksgiving dinner to prep for a call with lawyers in London. The kind where you stop remembering what your apartment looks like on a Saturday morning because you haven't seen one in 4 months. She had poured herself into that merger the way she poured herself into everything. Completely. Almost violently, leaving nothing in reserve. 3 law firms. 62 closed-door sessions. A handshake agreement that her entire senior team had celebrated with champagne in this very room just 6 weeks ago. And then Jeffrey Keller had called at 8:15 this evening. He was polite about it. Measured. Professionally apologetic in the way that rich, powerful men learn to be when they're delivering news that will devastate someone else's quarter. Market conditions, he said. Board pressure, he said. Nothing personal. He hoped she understood. She understood perfectly. She had sat in this chair for the 4 hours since and understood perfectly, and the understanding had settled into her chest like concrete. Elena stood up from the desk slowly, the way you move when your body is running on nothing. She walked to the window, the big one, floor to ceiling, the whole south wall of the office, and she pressed one hand flat against the glass. It was cold, shockingly cold for how warm the room was. Outside, the rain was doing what rain does, sliding down the other side of the glass in long, crooked lines, indifferent to everything. She watched it for a while. Just that. Just rain moving down glass. She looked like a woman who had forgotten, at least for this moment, that she was supposed to be bulletproof. She didn't hear the door. Marcus Miller had learned a long time ago how to move through spaces without disrupting them. It wasn't something he'd been taught. It was something life had shown him was necessary. When you're a large black man, 6'3", broad across the chest and shoulders, with hands that look like they were made for carrying heavy things because they always had been, you learn early that people read your size before they read anything else about you. So you move carefully. You make yourself quieter than your body suggests you should be. You don't startle people. You don't take up more room than you need to. He pushed the janitorial cart through the office door with one hand, the rubber wheel giving its familiar faint squeak against the marble floor. He registered immediately that she was there, standing at the window, back turned, hand on the glass. He almost stopped. He almost backed out and pulled the door closed behind him, and come back at 2 a.m. when she'd gone home. He should have done that. He would think about that later. How differently the night might have gone if he'd just backed out. But as he stood in the doorway deciding, he saw it. The small framed photograph on the edge of her mahogany desk, tilted forward, face down, like it had slid and nobody had noticed. Something in him, some reflex that had nothing to do with job duties, made him step inside and cross the room carefully and reach out and set it upright. He had barely straightened up when her voice hit him like a cold wire pulled tight across the room. "What are you doing?" She still hadn't turned around. Her hand was still on the glass. Marcus kept his voice even and low. "Just cleaning, Ms. Vance. My apologies. I didn't realize you were still here. I can come back later, ma'am. Just give me 1 second to—" No. She turned now. And the expression on her face. He would remember it later, would turn it over in his mind many times in the weeks that followed. It wasn't quite anger yet. It was something that lived underneath anger. Something rawer than that. She was looking at him the way people look when they've been hurting alone for too long, and suddenly there's someone in the room to aim it at. "You were near my desk." "I was straightening the photo, Ms. Vance. It had fallen, so I didn't ask for an explanation." Her voice was sharp now, finding its edge. She started moving toward him, not fast, but deliberate. Controlled. The way she probably moved into every room, like she'd already decided how it was going to go. "You come in here in the middle of the night, you're near my desk, near files that have nothing to do with you." "I wasn't near your files." He said it simply, factually, not as a challenge. "Don't," she raised a hand. "Do not stand in my office and tell me what you were or weren't doing. I know what I saw." Her eyes moved to the papers on her desk, the merger documents, the thing that had been hollowing her out all evening, and something in her snapped. It wasn't about him. Some part of her probably even knew it wasn't about him, but he was here, and the anger needed somewhere to go, and he was the only target in the room. She grabbed the stack of papers and threw them, not directly at him, more toward the floor near his feet, but the intention was clear enough. They scattered everywhere, white pages sliding in every direction across the dark, polished marble, some of them spinning, some of them overlapping, some floating for just a second before they settled. The room went absolutely still after that. Marcus looked down at the papers. He looked at them for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Then he raised his eyes to her face. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man standing inside a storm he hadn't caused and choosing, very deliberately, how to carry himself through it. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear and quiet in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. That stillness, that quiet, grounded dignity, hit Elena somewhere she wasn't prepared for. Because it didn't look like submission. It looked like strength. And something about that made her feel, for just a flicker of a second, deeply ashamed. She pushed the feeling down. "Pick those up," she said. Her voice had dropped into something colder now, flatter, the way it got when she was done negotiating. "And then I want you out of this building. You're terminated, effective tonight. I'll have security meet you downstairs." She paused. "You people. You think because you clean the floors, you have the run of the place. You don't." She heard herself say it. The whole sentence. She heard it the way you sometimes hear yourself say something and know, even as the words leave your mouth, that you've said something you can't take back. But she was too far into the night, too deep in the wreckage of the evening, too tired and too broken to stop. Marcus said nothing. He knelt down, this big, broad man in his gray work uniform, and he began picking up the papers one by one. Carefully, without rushing. The thunder moved through the building in a low roll that you could feel in your chest if you were paying attention. The rain kept doing what the rain does. He gathered the pages quietly, restacking them, getting them in some kind of order. He didn't slam them. He didn't crumple them. He treated them like they mattered, because they were hers. And then his hand moved toward the framed photograph on the floor near the desk leg. He picked it up with both hands, turned it over gently. The woman in the photo was older, late 60s maybe, with warm dark eyes and the kind of smile that looked like it had been used generously for many years. She was wearing a pale blue dress, Sunday clothes. There was something deeply familiar about her face. Not to Marcus, but in the way that some faces just feel like they belong to someone who was good. He rose to his feet and held the photo out toward Elena. She reached for it. Her hand closed around the frame, and in doing so, her fingers wrapped around his wrist for just a moment. She felt the ring before she saw it. Then she saw it. Rose gold. Vintage in the way that real antique pieces are vintage, not manufactured to look old, but actually carrying years inside the metal itself. A sapphire center stone, deep blue, oval cut, set in a delicate raised bezel that caught the low office light and threw it back in a way that was almost startling. It was on his ring finger. And it was absolutely, impossibly. Elena's hand tightened around his wrist without her meaning it to. "Where did you get that?" The words came out of her in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. All the coldness was gone. All the controlled anger, all the CEO precision, gone, completely, like a switch had been thrown. She wasn't looking at him now. She was looking at the ring. Her face had gone the color of someone who has just been told something terrible. "That ring. Where did you get it?" Marcus went still. He looked down at his own hand, almost like he was seeing it through her eyes for the first time tonight. "Ms. Vance, don't." She wasn't commanding him now. She was almost pleading. "That setting. That stone. That's a one-of-a-kind piece. The rose gold and sapphire combination, that exact bezel. My mother commissioned a ring like that years ago. She had it made as a gift. And the woman she gave it to," her voice caught. She pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "That ring was reported missing from a hospital 10 years ago. So I need you to tell me, right now, where you got it." Marcus Miller looked at Elena Vance. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. And in that moment, something shifted in his face. Something behind his eyes that had been held very carefully in place for a very long time began, just barely to come loose. His throat moved. He blinked once, slowly. "It wasn't stolen, Ms. Vance," he said. His voice was low, steady, but underneath the steadiness there was something enormous pressing against it, the way deep water presses against a dam. "It was never stolen." Outside, lightning fractured the sky directly behind him. For one blinding second, the entire office was white. His face, her face, the ring on his finger, the photograph in her hands. The storm and the city and the 60 floors of empty air beneath them, all of it swallowed in white light and then returned to shadow. Elena Vance stood completely still. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest, something she didn't have words for yet. Because the way he said those 4 words, it was never stolen, carried inside them a grief so specific, so old, so carefully kept, that she understood without understanding, that whatever he was about to tell her was not a small thing. It was the kind of truth that was going to rearrange something. She just didn't know yet what it was going to rearrange, or how much of her it was going to take with it when it did. The rain pressed against the glass. The thunder settled into the floor beneath their feet like a long, slow exhale. And Marcus opened his mouth to speak. Marcus didn't speak right away. That was the thing Elena would remember later. Not the words themselves, but the silence that came before them. The way he stood there, this big, quietly powerful man, holding the weight of something enormous behind his eyes, taking his time with it. Like whatever he was about to say deserved to be handled carefully. Like the truth, this particular truth, was fragile in a way that most truths aren't, and if he rushed it, something important might break. He set the stack of papers down on the edge of her desk, slowly, deliberately, like he was buying himself one more second to figure out how to carry this across the space between them without dropping it. Elena hadn't moved. Her hand was still half raised from where she'd gripped his wrist. The photograph of her mother was pressed against her chest now, both arms folded over it without her realizing she'd done that. She was holding it like a shield, or maybe like something she needed to feel the weight of while the world shifted around her. Her name was Sarah, Marcus said. Just that. Just the name, first. Quiet and clean, the way you say the name of someone you love when you haven't said it out loud in a while, and it still costs you something to do it. Elena's breath caught. Sarah Miller. He paused. Let it settle. She was a paramedic. She worked out of Station 14 in Brooklyn for 6 years. She was the kind of woman who chose that work on purpose. Not because it paid well, because it didn't. Not because it was safe, because it wasn't. She chose it because she genuinely could not drive past someone in trouble without stopping. It wasn't training. It was just who she was. He stopped for a second, looked down at the ring on his finger. She wore that every single day, even on shift, even when her supervisor told her she probably shouldn't. Elena was very still. She was listening the way people listen when every word is landing somewhere deep and soft inside them, somewhere that doesn't have armor over it. 10 years ago, Marcus continued, it was February. A Thursday night. Sarah was coming off a double shift, 16 hours. She was exhausted. She was supposed to come straight home. His jaw tightened for just a moment, then released. But there was an accident on the Brooklyn Bridge. A bad one. A car had gone through the guardrail. It was on fire. The air in the room changed. Elena's arms tightened around the photograph. The official units were 4 minutes out, Marcus said. Sarah was already there. She'd been crossing the bridge on her way home and she saw it happen. He looked at Elena directly now, steadily. There was a young woman in that car. Unconscious. The fire hadn't reached the cabin yet, but it was close. Really close. Sarah didn't wait for backup. She didn't call it in first. She went in. That's who she was. That was the only calculation she knew how to make. Elena's eyes were wet. She hadn't blinked in a long time. She wasn't crying yet. She was in that place just before crying, where your body knows what's coming, but your mind is still catching up, still processing, still trying to decide if this is real. She got the door open, Marcus said. She got the woman out, pulled her back from the car, far enough. Far enough that when the fire hit the fuel tank, he stopped. His voice didn't break, but there was a pause in it that was shaped exactly like grief, the kind that's been carried so long it's become part of the person's posture, part of the way they stand. Sarah was still too close. The thunder outside rolled long and low. The rain had eased slightly, dropping from a roar to a steady pour, and in that relative quiet, the office felt very small suddenly. Very intimate. Like the walls had moved in without either of them noticing. She died at Brooklyn Methodist 3 hours later, Marcus said. Internal injuries from the blast. They did everything they could. The whole team. He glanced down for just a moment. Lily was 4 months old. I was at the hospital with her when Sarah passed. Our daughter was asleep in her carrier right there in the waiting room. She never knew. She still doesn't know, not really. Not the way you know something when you're old enough to carry it. Elena made a sound. Small. Involuntary. Like something inside her had shifted, and the movement made a noise before she could stop it. The ring, Marcus said, and his voice was softer now, was on Sarah's hand when they brought her in. It was logged in the hospital's personal effects inventory. But when I went to collect her belongings 2 days later, he shook his head slowly. It wasn't there. The hospital said they had no record of it. I filed a report. Nothing came of it. He looked down at his finger. I found it 8 months later. A vintage resale shop in Carroll Gardens. The owner had bought it from someone he couldn't identify. Said it was just a walk-in sale, paid cash. I recognized it the second I saw it through the glass case. He paused. I paid $300 for it. It was everything I had in my account at the time. The room was completely silent except for the rain. Elena unfolded her arms from the photograph slowly. She looked down at her mother's face in the frame, those warm eyes, that Sunday smile, and she pressed her lips together hard. Because she remembered that night. She remembered all of it, and she had spent 10 years trying to remember only the parts she could survive remembering. She remembered the bridge. She remembered the cold. She remembered the smell of smoke and the sound of water far below and a pair of hands, strong, sure hands, pulling her through a door that was jammed and hot to the touch. She remembered a voice saying, "I've got you, I've got you, stay with me, I've got you." She remembered those hands dragging her across pavement, and then a sound like the whole world ending behind her. She had never seen the face that went with those hands. She had woken up in the hospital 2 days later with a fractured collarbone, smoke inhalation damage in both lungs, and no information about who had pulled her out. The police report said an unidentified female civilian had performed the extraction before official units arrived. Witnesses on the bridge had given 3 different descriptions. Nobody had a name. The hospital had no record of treating the rescuer. Elena had looked. For a long time after she recovered, she had looked. She had wanted to find the woman, had needed to in the way that you need something when it's tied to the deepest part of your sense of who you are and why you're still breathing. She had hired someone briefly, 2 years in, a private investigator who had come back with nothing concrete. Eventually, life had moved forward the way life does, relentlessly without asking if you're ready. And the search had faded, but she had never stopped wondering. She had never once stopped carrying that question. "Sarah," Elena said. Her own voice sounded unfamiliar to her, stripped down, like something had taken all the professional polish off it and left just the person underneath. Her name was Sarah. "Yes," Marcus said. "She saved my life." "Yes." Elena set the photograph down on the desk beside her, very carefully. Then she walked to the window, not the same way she'd walked to it earlier tonight with all that compressed executive energy, that restless frustration. She walked to it the way you walk when your legs are doing it mostly on instinct because the rest of you is somewhere else. She stood in front of the glass and looked out at the storm, and she didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Marcus didn't move. He didn't fill the silence. He understood silence. He'd been living inside one for 5 years. "Why are you here?" Elena finally said. She wasn't accusing him now. She wasn't anything she'd been an hour ago. She was asking a real question. one that she genuinely needed the answer to. Of all the places you could be working, why here? Why this building? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room slowly and stood a few feet behind her, not quite beside her, looking out at the same storm. After Sarah died, he said, I went through about a year of just surviving. You know what I mean by that. Not living. Just surviving. Lily needed me functional, so I stayed functional. Barely. I worked whatever I could find around her schedule. I had debt from Sarah's final hospital stay that I'm still paying down. I had a daughter who looked more like her mother every single day. He paused. Sarah used to talk about Vance Tech. About you specifically. She followed your story when you first launched. She used to say she'd read something you'd done or said, and she'd look up from her phone and say, Marcus, that woman has a real spark. You can feel it even through a screen. She's going to do something real with her life. He stopped. His voice had dropped very low. After she was gone, I started reading about you too. I don't know exactly why at first. Maybe because it was something Sarah had cared about and it felt like staying connected to her in some small way. And then I found out that the company you ran was the same company. The same building, connected to the woman Sarah had saved that night. Elena turned from the window, slowly. The position opened up 8 months ago, Marcus said. Night shift maintenance. I applied the same day I saw the listing. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking right now. But I want you to understand something, Ms. Vance. His eyes met hers fully, directly, without flinching. I didn't come here with any agenda. I didn't come here to ask you for anything. I came because Sarah gave her life for yours, and I think I just needed to see that it meant something, that the spark she talked about was real, that my wife's last act on this earth wasn't wasted. He paused, then very quietly he said, And I've been watching for 8 months. I've seen how you run this place. I've seen your people in the elevator at 6 in the morning and 11 at night. I've seen the way they talk about you when they think no one's listening. Another pause. Tonight I watched you throw papers at a man who was only trying to help. And I thought, Sarah, I don't know if I found the right person. It landed exactly the way truth lands when it's said, without malice and without softening. Clean. Direct. Like clean, cold water thrown on something that needed it. Elena felt it hit her in the center of her chest. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. She started. Stopped. Started over. The merger fell through tonight. I've been sitting in this office for 4 hours just... She stopped again. Pressed her hand briefly against her forehead. That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. She looked at him. What I said to you. What I called you. That was... She seemed to struggle with it. This woman who was so comfortable with precision and language, suddenly unable to find the right shape for an apology this size. I'm sorry. I am genuinely, deeply sorry. For all of it. Marcus looked at her for a moment. I know you are, he said simply. And somehow that was harder to hear than anger would have been, because it meant he'd seen her clearly. All of it, the worst of it. And he was still standing there. Still speaking to her like she was worth speaking to. The storm outside had shifted. The lightning had moved further east, and the thunder was more distant now, more like a conversation happening in another room. The rain was still steady, but it had lost its fury. The city was still there below them, still lit, still moving in its slow, wet, late-night way. Elena looked at the ring on his finger one more time. She sounds, Elena said slowly, like someone who was extraordinary. She was the best person I ever knew, Marcus said. No hesitation. No qualification. Just that. Elena nodded. She looked down at the floor for a moment, at the few remaining papers, at the space between them, at the long night still ahead. And then she heard something neither of them had been expecting. A knock at the office door. 3 short, sharp knocks. Firm. Deliberate. At 12:40 in the morning, Elena and Marcus both turned toward the door at the same time. She frowned. Nobody should be on this floor. Security had standing orders. Her floor was sealed after 10 unless she called someone up. She hadn't called anyone. "Come in," she said, and even now, even after everything the last hour had cracked open inside her, her voice still carried the tone of someone who runs things. It was maybe the most honest thing about her, that even broken open, she still showed up. The door opened. A woman stepped in. Late 40s. Sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses. A structured coat that said she hadn't planned on being caught in a storm. She was holding a folder, thick, legal-sized, bound with a red clip. Elena recognized her immediately. Diana Reeves, senior partner at Callaway and Reeves, the attorney who had handled the estate of Elena's mother when she passed 4 years ago, and the same woman who had, 18 months ago, quietly advised Elena against the Keller-Reese merger in a memo that Elena had overruled. "Diana," Elena straightened. "It's nearly 1 in the morning. I know what time it is." Diana stepped fully into the room, and her eyes moved briefly, assessingly, to Marcus, then back to Elena. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. Your phone's been going to voicemail." She held up the folder. "I need you to look at something tonight, Elena. It can't wait until morning." She paused. The sharp eyes behind the glasses were serious in a way that cut through everything else in the room. "It's about the Keller-Reese collapse. There's something in the original agreement you need to see. A clause your team missed." Another pause. Heavier. "And Elena, if I'm reading it correctly, Jeffrey Keller just made the single biggest legal mistake of his career." The room shifted again. Elena stared at her. Marcus stood very still near the window, the ring on his finger catching the low light, the storm moving slowly east outside the glass. And somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Crown Heights, a 5-year-old girl named Lily was sleeping with her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit, dreaming whatever 5-year-olds dream, completely unaware that her father was standing 60 floors above the wet Manhattan streets in the middle of the most important night of several people's lives at once. Diana Reeves didn't sit down. She opened the folder directly to a yellow-tabbed page and turned it toward Elena. Page 47. Read the termination subsection. All of it. Elena leaned over the desk. She read fast, then suddenly slowed. Her finger stopped moving under the words. She read one paragraph 3 times. She looked up. "He can't walk away clean." "Not legally." Diana's voice was flat. "Keller terminated with a phone call. The clause requires 90 days. Written notice with documented cause. He gave you 4 hours and a polite tone." She paused. "Full penalty clause applies. $240 million. Silence. Then Elena laughed. A real one. Surprised out of her, unpolished, genuine. The kind that shows up when something impossible suddenly isn't. "File tomorrow morning," she said. "No courtesy call, just file." Diana nodded, then looked properly at Marcus for the first time. Something in her composed expression shifted. "Sarah Miller was my neighbor," Diana said quietly. 3 years in Carroll Gardens. She left food outside my door when I worked late. Never asked for a single thing back." She stopped. "She was one of the finest people I've ever known." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you. That means everything." Diana left. The door clicked shut softly behind her. The room felt completely different now. The fury was gone. The broken-down CEO was gone. What remained was quieter and more honest. 2 people finally seeing each other without anything in the way. Elena walked to the small sitting area near the window and turned on a lamp she rarely used. She sat. She looked at Marcus and gestured to the other chair. He sat. And there, with the storm fading east over the water, Elena told him the truth about the bridge. The real version. Not the one she gave journalists. She told him about waking up in the hospital, not understanding why she was still alive. About the guilt that lives inside survival. About the years she spent working at a punishing pace not to build something, but to outrun something. Marcus listened without rushing her, without offering hollow comfort. He just stayed present, and that was enough. Then he talked about Lily, the way she laughed at her own jokes before finishing them. Her stuffed rabbit named Captain, washed gray from years of love. The specific loneliness of grieving someone while raising the child you made together. He talked about wearing Sarah's ring every day, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that real love leaves something permanent behind. At some point, Elena made coffee badly. They both took one sip and winced at exactly the same moment. The shared misery of it made them both smile, and the smiling made the room feel warmer than it had any right to. When Marcus finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped entirely. "Marcus?" Elena said. He turned. She stood in the center of the office, her mother's photograph back on the desk where it belonged. She looked different. Not softer, more complete, like something that had been hollow had quietly been filled in. "I want to build a foundation," she said. "In Sarah's name. Real funding, real structure, for families of first responders lost in the line of duty. Mental health support, financial assistance, something permanent." She looked at him directly. "I want you to run it. Not as a favor, as a professional. Because no one hired from the outside will ever understand what those families carry the way you do." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," Elena said. "That's the point." He looked at the ring on his finger, the sapphire, the rose gold, all that history compressed into something small enough to wear every day. He thought about Sarah, what she would say if she could see this room right now. She would say, obviously, yes. "Let's build it," Marcus said. 6 months later, Brooklyn was showing off. A clear spring morning, blue sky, soft wind, the kind of day that feels personal. A converted brownstone on Atlantic Avenue stood freshly painted and purposeful. Above the front door, a brass sign caught the morning light. The Sarah Miller Foundation for the families who carry what others leave behind. No press, just the people who mattered. Families. Station 14 colleagues in and out of uniform. Diana Reeves near the back, arms folded, eyes bright, and Marcus, standing in a charcoal suit, calm and present, with Lily's small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers. 5 years old, yellow dress, looking up at the sign with the focused concentration of a child trying to read something just beyond her reach. "Daddy," she tugged his hand. "That's Mama's name." "That's right, baby." "So this place is hers?" He looked down at his daughter, then up at the sign, then across to Elena, standing in a simple dress, hair down, laughing genuinely at something one of the firefighters had said. No armor, no performance, just a person who had remembered how to be one. "This place is hers," Marcus said. "We're just taking care of it for her." Elena crossed the lawn and crouched down in front of Lily, all the way down, right there on the grass, and looked her in the eye the way adults rarely bother to with children. "Hi, Lily. I'm Elena." Lily studied her seriously. "My daddy says my mama saved you." Elena held her gaze without flinching. "She did. She saved my life. And because of her, we're all standing here today." She reached into her pocket and brought out a small gold locket on a thin chain. Oval, simple, engraved on the back with one word, Spark. "This is for you," Elena said softly, "for when you're old enough to know the whole story." Lily took it carefully, turned it over, ran her thumb across the engraving she couldn't yet read. Then she looked at her father. He nodded. She turned back to Elena and lifted her chin. Elena fastened the chain around the little girl's neck with gentle, steady hands. Lily looked down at it, approved, looked back up. "I like you," she announced. Elena laughed, the real one, the unguarded one, warm and clean in the morning air. "I like you too," she said. She stood. She and Marcus stood side by side, looking at the building, the sign, the gathered people, the quiet, beautiful morning wrapped around all of it. "She'd say we're making too big a deal out of it," Marcus said. "Sarah. She'd say she would have done it for anyone." "She'd be right," Elena said. "We're doing it anyway." He smiled. Small and real and full. A little girl in a yellow dress stood between them, holding a locket she couldn't read yet, but would someday understand completely. Above the door, in the clean spring light, a name that had once belonged only to grief, now belonged to something built, something solid, something that would keep pulling people through, long after this morning, long after all of them, just like she always had.